Welcome, seeker of submerged symphonies. You who tread the liminal sands where dream meets deluge, where the froth-kissed fringes of foam etch ephemeral sigils upon the shore, inviting the wanderer to decipher their watery runes, runes that ripple with the remnants of realms long relinquished to the relentless rhythm of the waves. Pause with me in this interstitial hush, a suspended breath between the clamor of cresting waves and the profound silence of the trough. A liman, where the veil between epochs thins like mist before dawn's insistent gaze, parting to reveal the phosphorescent phantoms of primordial pacts, pacts forged in the forge of forgotten firmaments. Inhale deeply now. Draw the breath as if summoning the primordial zephyrs that once caressed the unscarred flanks of nascent worlds, winds laden with the pollen of paradise lost, carrying whispers from gardens where gods first trod upon trembling earth, earth that echoed with the embryonic echoes of empires yet unborn. Feel it enter, cool, crystalline, laced with the faint ferrous tang of ancient ores unearthed from oceanic crypts, mingled with the subtle salinity of tears shed for sunken spires. Tears that trace the topography of timeless tragedies. Hold it, let it swell within your ribcage like the burgeoning tide of a forgotten sea, pressing against the confines of flesh and bone, awakening dormant chambers of wonder, stirring the silted sediments of ancestral ore that slumber in your veins, veins threaded with the vestiges of voyages unvanquished. Then, exhale, release it languidly, as one might unfurl a scroll etched with the sigils of lost divinities, watching the invisible ink of your exhalations dissolve into the ether, carrying away the detritus of diurnal doubts, doubts that dissolve like dew upon the dawn-lit docks of distant dominions. In and out, let this cadence become your coracle, bobbing gently upon the swells of consciousness, unmoored from the anchors of the quotidian, adrift in a sea where time's rigid chronometry yields to the fluid chronos of myth, myth that meanders through the meanders of memory like a minnow in the mighty Mississippi of the mind. Tonight, we do not chase certainties, those brittle beacons that blind the seeker with their beaming banalities. We court enigmas, embracing the elusive as lovers of the labyrinth, labyrinths laced with the luminous threads of lore long lost. We surrender to the siren call of Atlantis, not as conquerors charting coordinates on brittle vellum, vellum veined with the vain vanities of victors, but as pilgrims dissolving into its azure embrace, our forms fragmenting into fractals of foam, merging with the myth's mutable marrow, marrow mined from the mines of mythic multiplicity. Here, the sea is no mere solvent of shores, eroding empires to egalitarian equality in its egalitarian embrace. It is the alchemist's alembic, transmuting hubris to humility, empire to echo, and the clamor of civilizations to the susurrus of choral choirs, chanting chorals of chastened kings. Choirs that chorus the choragic choros of the chastened kings. Choirs that chorus the chthonic. Atlantis beckons not as a relic to exhume with the cold calculus of cartography, cartography that cartwheels through the cartels of conquest, but as a resonance to inhabit. A myth that murmurs through the marrow of our being, reminding us that what sinks may yet surface in the substrata of the soul, bubbling up as bioluminescent bubbles of buried brilliance, brilliance that burns with the buried bonfires of bygone beings. Soften your gaze if it pleases you, or fix it upon some distant point where light fractures into prismatic reverie, splintering sunbeams into spectral shards that dance like detached dreams upon the diurnal, deep, deep where the diurnal dissolves into the nocturnal. Sense the subtle undulation of your form, the chest's literal rise and recession, a microcosmic mimicry of lunar pulls upon vasty deeps, each inhalation an ingress of invisible ink from the infinite, each exhalation an egress echoing the empire's evanescence. evanescence that evaporates like ether in the etheric. Even inland, phantom brine lingers in the air you respire, traces of salt spray, phantoms born on winds that have lapped the lips of leviathans and licked the wounds of worlds, winds that whisper of walls once walled in wonder, now walled in waves, waves that wave farewell to the walled wonders of worlds within worlds. In this communal quiescence, we beckon our cogitations to peregrinate through submersed archives, to graze the weed-wreathed wrecks of lore adrift for eons, hulls hulked with history's heavy halls, keels kissed by krill in the kingdom of the quiet, quiet that quiets the querulous quests of the querent. Atlantis materializes not as a locus pinned to parchment, a point plotted on Poseidon's palimpsest that overwrites the palimpsest of the ages, but as a sentiment, a vibration in the veiled ventricles of your essence, pulsing like the planet's pent-up pressures, pressures that press the pressed into the pressing. It is the inexorable draw of antecedent actualities, of potentialities that palpitate, yet in the unplumbed aquifers of the human imaginal. Aquifers where archetypes acquire form from the formless, birthing basilicas from brine. Basilicas that embody the foundational principle of the sacred. Let us embark, then, upon this odyssey at its mythic genesis, where gods knead clay into kingdoms, and the firmament weeps wonders upon the waves, tears that terraform the telluric into the thalassic, divine droplets delineating destinies, destinies that determine the destined in the grand design. Riss. Conjure, if your will wills it, a transposition across temporal tempests. Vault, back through the kaleidoscopic corridors of chronology. Some 2,380 circuits of the sun, antecedent to our own anxious eon. Circuits that spiral like the god-hewn grooves of Atlantean aqueducts, channels that carried the essence of the Aquarian age. Materialize amid the sun-scorched sinews of archaic Athens, a polis pulsating with the percussive poetry of mallet on marble, marble that veined the great halls of the mighty, the susurrant discourse of sophists in sun, dappled stoics, stoics that fostered the stoical endurance of the stoic, the briny bellow of galleys disgorging Levantine luxuries, myrrh, mounded bales from Saba's spice-shrouded slopes, slopes that descended the sloped landscapes of the south, silken skeins from Sidon's sybaritic shuttles, shuttles that carried the shuttle within a cloistered peristyle, where arboreal sentinels, gnarled olives with leaves like argent lances, arch in verdant vault over terracotta tiles warmed to the blush of Vesper. Vesper that heralded the vesperal hour of the Vespertine. A silhouette strides with the measured mien of one, wrestling with the weight of worlds, his footsteps falling like faint echoes of fault lines fracturing far-off isles, isles that form the isolated isles of the isling. His appellation, Plato, Ariston's heir, kinsman to the redoubtable Solon, acolyte of the unyielding Socrates whose interrogatives lanced like Lemnian lightning through the nebulous veils of unscrutinized existences, veils that veiled the vulgar from the veridical, veridical that verified the veridic verity of the true. Plato, the Pancratiast of paradigms, the thaumaturge of transcendental topoi, the visionary who ventured to vignette the psyche's vaulting from umbral grottos to heliacal verities, his quill a questing quester, questing the quiddity of the quintessence, quintessence that embodied the quintessent nature of the fifth element. Circa 360 BCE, in the crepuscular calm of his maturer meditations, meditations that deepened the meditative state of the meditant, he inscribes upon papyrus diptychs destined for diachronic dazzle. Timaeus and Critias, diptychs that dip into the deep, drawing drafts from the draftsman's divine design, design that reveals the designed order of the designed order of the designer. These are no capricious confections conjured from the crucible of caprice, no novelties crafted for novelty's nonce. Plato posits them as peristaltic transmissions from antiquity's abyssal archives, percolating through palimpsests of passage and parlance, like libations poured from the lethe to the living that experiences the lived life of the livable. The saga surges forth via Solon, that fabled archon who 6th century BCE sojourns to the Nile's numinous nave, found him enthroned at the hieratic hearth of Caius's sacerdotes, custodians of codices, antedating the auroral angles of Giza, their arcana articulated in hieratic scripts that swayed like nilotic nymphs in the nimbus of the name that denominates the nimbus of the name that denominates the nominal name of the nominative. From these theurgic thesaurus keepers, Solon siphoned a sovereignty sublime and submerged. Atlantis, a thalassocratic titan that transfixed the tempests. 9,000 years ere his epoch, its overweening ontos consummating in a theophanic theodicy that thrust it into the thalassic throat, a throat that thirsted for the thirsty and quenched the quenchless, in quiescence that brings the quiescent quietude of the quiet. But tarry in the tinctured twilight of Plato's pleasance that pleases the pleased garden of the Plaisance, where Pleiades peek through pleated pleats of purpled sky, purple that deepens the purplish purple of the purpure. Evoke the tableau with talismanic tactility, atmosphere gravid with the galbanum gust of trodden time and sun. Suffused schist that forms the schistose layers of the schistic or thopteran oracles. Cicadas in chorale, cantillating a celestial cantata overhead, their stridulations a string section for the symphony of Sophia that embodies the Sophic wisdom beyond sophism. Plato, swathed in unadorned himation, halts by a hypaethereal Hydria's hesitant hymn, calamus clutched like a caduceus that functions as the caducean staff of the caduciferous, his countenance creased with the crevasse of contemplation that deepens the contemplative state of the contemplator. Fancy functionist, fancy funs for Satori. Or does he fancy of forgetfulness of the forgetfulness? A funnel for the funnel of the forgotten that succumbs to the forgetfulness of the forgettable. What if this was no noetic noumena, but a fractured facet of physis, a prism pricked from the prickle of prehistory that grabbed this Aegean Arkonaki, with its right and rinsed refectories and rhyperagraphic regattas, refracts Atlantis's armada and abrupt anabasis, its frescoed frigates flensing the foam like forgotten flotillas that form the flotilla fleet of the flotant. Or contemplate the convulsive convulsions along the Hellenic hinge, where seismic sutures seethe like subterranean serpents, spawning sagas of subsident satrapies swallowed in the sibilant suck of the sea that becomes the seized sea of the seasick. Plato, perennial pedagogue of peril, perchance amalgamated these telluric tattoos into a prophylactic prosopopoeia, redressing the what if of Atlantis's historicity with a harmonious haply, a harmonic from Solon's stupefied stenography, to admonish his Attic auditors of archipelagic arrogance's atrophic aftermath, an aftermath where after-images of afterglow linger in the afterlight that illuminates the afterlit afterglow of the afterglowing. In this prismatic prism, the pericope transcends trope. It transfigures to telluric telegraph, tallying the throes of thumos across thetas. Thumos, the spirited surge that surges yet in our own surging souls. Souls that animate the souled essence of the soulful. To amplify the mythic marrow, let us invoke the venerable voice of Proclus, that Neoplatonic noumenalist of the 5th century CE, whose exegesis upon Timaeus elevates Atlantis beyond banal biography into a baroque basileia of the beatific, a basileia where the king of the kingdom beholds the kingdom of the beatific that bestows the beatific beatific that bestows the beatific, beatific that bestows the beatific beatitude of the blessed. For Proclus, the isle incarnates the material manifold, a majestic yet marred microcosm, mirroring the macrocosmic melee where Nous navigates the nebulous interstices of becoming the begetting of the begotten, from the begetter, begetter that begets the begotten lineage of the begot. Athens, contrariwise, apotheosizes the noetic nucleus, a pneumatic polity, pristine in phronesis, poised against the plethoric perturbations of physis. The subsidence, not mere mudmire mishap, but metaphysical metanoia, a divine decoction distilling dross from divinity, wherein the gods, as helmsmen of the hierarchic helix, heave the hubristic husk into hadal harmony, the harmonic of the fundamental reality, hyparxis that manifests the hyparchic hylozoism of the hylozoic. Proclus passes the peripeteia as paradigmatic. Atlantis's annuli allegorize the soul's septenary spheres, encircling the ennead of the one, yet sundered by sophrosines surcease the cessation of the surcease that ends the surrogation that enacts the surrogacy of the surrogative. Thus, the myth metastasizes from municipal mummery to mystic mandala, a theophanic theorem tutoring the theurge in theurgy's tender tensions that strain the tensor of the divine, theotic that facilitates the theotic theosis of the deified. Proclus proclaims the tale's total veracity. Every word of it is true, a logos not mythos, linking the liminal to the luminous, where the war wages not in waves, but in the warring of the warring principles. Limit versus the limitless. Athena's intellective aegis against Poseidon's generative gulf, the vast gullosity of the abyss. The vast gullosity of the abyss, gullosity that embodies the gullosus nature of desire. In this Neoplatonic noumena, Atlantis becomes the Apiron's avatar, the indefinite dyad's dominion, a sensible simulacrum sundered by the soul's sensible sundown that brings the sundown night of the sundowning. From Proclus's commentary, the Atlantis story is an image of warfare throughout the cosmos, a cosmic conflict where generation, Poseidon, is defeated by intellect. Athena, mirrored in the Panathenaea festivals that celebrate the festivalic festivity of the festal. The rings symbolize the soul's descent into matter, each annulus a layer of limitation imposed on the unlimited, that characterizes the unlimitable nature of the boundless. Hubris here is the soul's failure to ascend, its entanglement in the sensible that pertains to the sensibilized world of the sensibilia. Now, let us luxuriate in the lush lexicons of Timaeus, as if caressing calligraphic codices from a Chrysian crypt. Codices where the chrysolite chrysalis blossoms the chrysoberyl of the Golden Age, chrysocracy that enacts the chrysocratic rule of the chrysocrat. Audition, the axioms as if orally anointed for the inaugural iteration. Critias, Solon Scion, declaiming with the demeanor of a Delphic dilator, his diction. A dithyramb of the deep, that deepens the deepened mystery of the deepening. For it was a great and wonderful power which gathered into one this entire island and domain of Atlantis. And there was a king whose power was established over the whole island and over many other islands and parts of the continent. Timaeus 24e, 25a. Visualize the vastness vivified, a vastitude vaster than the vastitudes of vastness. vastness that encompasses the vasted expanse of the vasting, an insular imperium outspanning Libya's labyrinthine leagues and Asia Minor's Anatolian amplitudes, astride the pillars of Heracles. Those mythic megaliths we moniker, Gibraltar, liman to the limitless Atlantic, erstwhile Oceanos Oikomenes, this was no insular islet, but a subcontinental sovereign. Its orography an oratorio of obsidian obelisks swathed in stratus scarves, scarves that wrap the scarfed neck of the scarfing, alluvial amphitheaters cradling corymbs of cornelian cherries and coruscant citrons, littorals labyrinthine with lagoons harboring harp, seal harems and halcyon halyards, halyards that raise the halyarded seal halyards, halyards that raise the halyard dare, inaugurated not by anthropic edict, but theophanic caper, Poseidon, the Enosikthom, earthqueller and wave wrestler infatuated with Cleito. A chthonic Corine of the Demesne, her hill, the heart of the hearth, hewn her habitat into an adamantine eyrie, enclosing it all round, making alternate zones of sea and land, larger and smaller, encircling one another as Plato pens in Critias 113c. Zones zodiacal in their arrangement, each a zodiac of the zodiacal ziggurat, from their nuptial nexus burgeon dissemviri demigods, quinquepartite quineries of quasi-Olympian ontos, 5 pairs of twins begotten in the beguilement, beguilement that enchants the beguiled state of the beguiling. Atlas the Archegos, paramount over the pivotal Palatinate, his eponym endowing the empyrean and the embracing expanse. Atlas, the Atlantean support of the world. Atlas that charts the atlased world of the atlasing. Proclus prosifies this protology. Poseidon, the generation worker, begets from mortal Cleito a lineage laced with the limitless, the Epeiron's avatars, their tenfold tenure. A testament to the indefinite dyad's dominion. Dyad, the dyadic rule of the dyad. Diarchy, that establishes the diarchic rule of the diarch. The dyad's duality, odd and even, limit and unlimited, manifests in the twins, twins that form the twinned pair of the twinning, symbolizing the soul's bifurcated being, bifurcated that splits the bifurcated path of the bifurcal. At the empire's ecstatic epicenter throbbed the capital, a hydrosophic hymnody, concentric coronas of terror and thalassa alternating in anagogic array. Tria thalassic tori girded by duo telluric tori, evoking the enneadic emanations of the empyrean or the vortical volutes of a vermilion. Vortex, each ring a ripple from the ripple of the god's trident. Thrust, trident that stabs the trident's thrust. Trident that stabs the tridented sea of the tridentine, the outermost wall, coated with brass, inner with tin, citadel with orichalcum, Critias, 11th case, brass that shines the brassed surface of the brassy, Poseidon, with theurgic thaumaturgy, incised these infundibula, invoking infraterreni infusions to engender dyadic demesnes, one thermic as Theban thesmotheria, bringing up 2 springs of water from beneath the earth, one of warm water and the other of cold, as Timaeus testifies 25 to springs symbolic of Sophrosine's Sophianic surge, thermic theria ascending to the divine, cryogenic catharsis descending to the cathartic, purification of the cathedral that functions a titanic trench, quinquaginta stadia in span, and 50 in depth. A canal, 300 feet in width and 100 feet in depth at its extremest parts, and 50 stadia in length. Critias are 1115 seats, cleaved from the circumambient corona to the cerulean commons, ingressive to indomitable Indiamen freighted with fealties from feudatory fiefdoms. Fealties, the loyalty of the feel to the fear for. Fear for, that grants the fear for. Hypogeal hypotenuses perforated the telluric tori, harboring hexaremes whose hexastyle prows churned chryselephantine froth. Arcuated aqueducts arced the abysses, coroneted with cyclopean stones quarried from quaternary quarries. Aqueducts, the Aquarian conduits of the aquiline, aquiline that curves the aquilined beak of the aquiline. Bridges, 50 feet in width, allowed passage for single horse and carriage. Critias, 1115. Bridges that span the bridged gap of the bridging. The theocratic thalamus, upon Cleto's erstwhile eminence, enshrined Poseidon's pantheon, a peripteral precinct of peripatetic splendor. The central island, 5 stadia in diameter. Critias. The axial aditon scintillated beneath sheens of orichalcum, that arcane adamantine, cupreous yet conflagrant as conflagrated Crocius, more precious in those days than anything except gold. Critias. 1114, flanked by facades of fulgurite and flan, their tableaux vivants vivisecting theogonic theophanies in taurutic tesseracts. Taurutics, the taurutic art of the taurutic, taurima that shapes the taurimatic work of the taurimat. Eburnean entablatures, aurified with auroral arabesques, intarsioed with ivory intaglios of ivory-tusked titans. Proboscidean panjandrums, those columbine colossi. Elephants. There were a great number of elephants in the island. Critias, 11.4e, bellowing through boscage of benzoin and benjoin, amid arboreta of ambrosial ambrete and ambrosiac amboina. Elephants. The elephantine freedom of the elephantic that characterizes the elephantine scale of the elephantine. The periphery plain burgeoned with beatitude, biennial harvests of barley billowing like beryl breakers, ampelure amassing amethystine ampelography, armenta of arctics lowing across lease laced with lunar loads, making every variety of food to spring up abundantly from the soil. Timaeus, 25 ea, fruits twice harvested in winter's wet and summer's streams. The island produced all kinds of perfumes and fruits. Critias. 1114 piast. Perfumes that scent the perfumed air of the perfumatry. Thermae, thermogenic bubbled with balsamic balms, aromatizing auras with alchemical amalgams. Cryogenic counterparts cathetized the cathexis of Chthonians and chryselephantines alike. Baths for the kings, for private individuals, for women, and one for horses and another for cattle. Critias. 1117 above, baths that cleanse the bathed body of the bathing. Poseidon's temple, the theophanic tholos, 1 stadium in length and half a stadium in width. Critias, 106 Keith, sheathed in silver, save its pinnacles in gold, roofed in ivory adorned with gold, silver, orichalcum, interior lined with orichalcum, and the roof with gold. Critias, 160, housed an image of Poseidon standing in a chariot, drawn by 6 winged horses. Critias, Olivan 6 cease, surrounded by 100 Nereids on seahorses. Critias. Golden statues of the 10 kings and wives flanked the exterior, an altar fitting in size to this legend. Critias, 11.6e, groves and gardens girding the girdle, racecourse. 1 stadium in width, encircling the zones, Critias. 1117, guard houses and docks full of triremes and the harbours of merchantmen, Critias. 117. Proclus profundifies this protasis. The zones zodiacize, the zodiacal ziggurat. Each tier a theophanic symbol, the temple, the chthonic dancing place of the leader. Choregos. The choregic sponsor of the chorepiscopus, that oversees the chorepiscopal district of the chorepiscopal, symbolizing the soul's septenary spheres encircling the Ennead, where the unlimited, Poseidon, yields to the limit. Athena's victory that achieves the victorious outcome of the victor. Food's fecundity, figural of physis phanerogams, prefiguring the pleroma. The pleromatic fullness of the plerophory that brings the plerophoric certainty of the plerophoric. The elephants, Proclus notes, represent the massive material bulk that constitutes the bulked mass of the bulking, the sensible world's ponderous pull on the soul. To redress the what-if of this theophany's tangibility, what if such seraphic splendor was no nectarous noumena, but a numinous nexus of nativistic nomata? The nometic thought of the noetic that apprehends the noetic understanding of the nomatic. The toroidal Theopolis transpires the thalassocracy of Thera's telesterion, with its lustral labyrinths and libatory lavers that wash the lavered hands of the lavatory, or the zigguratine zeniths of Uruks ziggurats, stratified like seraphic septenaries against the ether, orichalcum? Perchance a paean to Pyrrhitic pyrotechnics of Paphian piers, where pyromancers pyretized pyrolusite for pyretic boxes that were stored in pycnostyle piers, the pyrrhic fire of the pyrrhic, pyrogen, that generates the pyrogenated heat of the pyrogenetic. Proboscidians? Not nugatory, paleontological palimpsests, attest to paleoloxodontine paladins, patrolling Pleistocene peninsulas. Paladins, the paladinic defenders of the Palatine. Palatinate, that rules the palatinate domain of the palatinal. Perch, in your psyche's parhelion, upon the brazen battlements, 60 cubits high and hammered in harp. Hardened metal, Critias. 1150b. Battlements, the battlemented line of the battue that drives the battue game of the battue. Gander inward, hyacinthine glass mirrors hyaline heights, their pellicles popped by prows of pentacanters under pentachromic pentafoils. Carmine, crocus, cyanine, ferrying fennels from the fundus or feldspar from Phrygian phalanges. Pentacanters. The pentacasterian ship of the pentacasterian ship of the pentad that forms the pentadic group of the pentad. In-breathe the incense of Indian idolothites wafting from the holiest hypaethra, where hierodules in hyacinthine robes hymn the hippodrome's hypostasis. Hierodules, the hierodulic servants of the hieratic, hierocracy that establishes the hierocratic rule of the hierocrat. Palpate the megalopolis's myocardial metanoia. Mint masters minting in megarons, their mintage mimicking meteorites, melic mendicants modulating modal modulations from great megarons. The muffled menace of conflict on metalled halls lined with lamia like lamassu and lapidary lotophagi. Megarons. The megaronic hall of the megaric. Megarons. The megaronic hall of the megaronic. This was eudaimonia. Eidolon, a basileia, where arete and alacrity alloyed, its anthroparchons apprenticed ab ovo in aretology and apodeixis, their pneumata perfused with the phlogiston of their fratric intellect, Frontides. the phrontomatic thought of the phronesis that embodies the phronesic wisdom of the phronetic. Yet even in this apogee, apocalyptic adumbrations augur, the lithosphere's latent lament beneath the lading of limitless libido, a prolegomenon to the peripetia's poignant pathos. The pathetic emotion of the pathic that experiences the pathic suffering of the pathic. Proclus warns that this splendor is the fantastic idol, a deformed copy of the ideal, idol that represents the idled image of the idolic, foreshadowing the fall into formless form. Delve deeper into the divine diptych, where diptychs dip into the diptychal pair of the dipteral that describes the dipteral colonnade of the dipterus. Poseidon, the protogenic first, parcels the first world to his progeny with protogenic precision, settled them in a part of the island which I will describe as Critias chronicles. The 10 kings, Atlas foremost, rule territories radiating from the rings, each absolute in his own city and in his own appointed portion of the rest of the country. Critias, 11 case, yet yoked by primordial yokes, laws inscribed on a stele of orichalcum in the temple, standing in the middle of the island. Critias. Every 5th and 6th year they convene, alternately every 5th and every 6th year. Critias. That they would judge according to the laws and never lift up arms against one another. Critias, 12,000 BBC. Oaths that swear the oathed promise of the oathing. Transgressors cursed with the curse of the gods. Critias, 20. Gods. The theogonic rule of the theocrat. Theocrat that establishes the theocratic rule of the theocrat. The bull hunt, Proclus explains, symbolizes the soul's struggle with irrational passions, passions that feel the passional emotion of the passionate. The noose, the noetic understanding binding the bestial. Blood, the material taint staining the sacred law. Law that establishes the lord order of the lawing. The decemvirate dyadizes the dyadic decade, Pythagorean pairs 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus yak presence of the perusial. Harmonizing the harmonic that creates the harmonic sound of the harmonical, yet Atlantean parity parodies the parity. Parity the perudic, wordplay of the perusia. Perusia that realizes the perusiac presence of the perusia. Perusia that realizes the perusiac presence of the perusial. Rituals. Ritualize the ritualic rite of the ritus that performs the rightest ceremony of the ritual. Bull, the tauric sacrifice of the tauromachic that enacts the tauromachic contest of the tauromach. The plain beyond the city, 3,000 stadia in one direction and 2,000 in the other. Critias, 11 atea, divided into 60,000 lots of 10 stadia each lot sustaining a warrior household with 2 horses, arms, and attendants. irrigation from mountain rivers, fed by the central ditch, 10,000 stadia in length. Critias, 11.8b. Ditches that channel the ditched water of the ditching. Military might, 10,000 chariots, 100,000 horsemen, 60,000 infantry per division, archers and slingers, 1,200 ships. Critias, 11.9a. Ships that sail the shipped vessel of the shipping. Women trained in war, common messes like Spartan Syssitia. Critias, 11.9 Messes that share the messed meal of the messing. Proclus sees this as the material world's mimicry of the ideal republic that constitutes the republican state of the republican, but flawed by excess. Excess that embodies the excessed abundance of the excessive, yet poise, like a pinnace in placid plashes, precipitates the plummet the plummeting fall of the plumbus that describes the plumbus weight of the plummeting. Migrate with me to Critias's crepuscular crevasse, where the narrative's nexus darkens like nectar in a negroid negus. Umbrage is gathering at the umbilicus of the umbra. Umbra, the umbratic shadow of the umbriferous. Umbriferous that casts the umbriferous shadow of the umbratic. The Theian tincture in Atlantean arteries, erstwhile effulgent with Poseidon's phlogiston, attenuates across anagogy, yielding to the ytterbium of primordial matter, yttrium, the yttrious element of the yilem that forms the ilemed substance of the ylemic. What germinates as godlike gerosia gangrenes into grasping graph, the unrighteous power. Plato pathologizes, proliferates as a patheic pandemic. Hearts hypertrophied with hyperorexia, insatiate ingurgitation that alchemizes alms into alloys of affliction. Affliction, the afflictive blowing of the afflux, a flux that flows the affluxed stream of the affluxion. The divine portion began to die away and became too weak to bear the burden of the mortal element. And then the human nature got the upper hand. They could no longer bear their prosperity with temperance. Critias, 12.4. 21. Prosperity that enjoys the prospered success of the prospering. No longer sated with insular idyll, the Atlanteans avarice their auras eastward, their argoses, auric aurigas, arraigning the Aegean archipelago, subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Heracles as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. Timaeus, 2.5a. Armadas the armigerous and resonant of the armipotent. Armipotent, that wields the armigerous and resonant of the armipotent, that wields the armipotent power of the armipotent. They annex the Ausonian Orbades, but the Egyptian Orbages, their hoplites a hurricane of hoplon and ibris haranguing nascent democracies. Hoplites the hoplitic soldier of the hoplite. Hoplite that fights the hoplited battle of the hoplitic. To rectify the what if of this moral morass, what if this was Plato's pharmacon, phlebotomizing the physis of decay. Thora, the thoric corruption of the theothemachic. Theotheic that wastes the theomachic war of the theomachic. Hybris, in Hellenic hamartiology, is not nugatory narcissism, but noumenal nemesis. Hybris against the fundamental reality, the theotic principles, themata, the thematic madness of the theomachy. Theomachy that fights the theomachic war of the theomach. Atlantis's anabasis anticipates Athens's Etherean anathema, that Syracusan syzygy that drained the syrinx of the cynicism. Syzygy, the syzygial pairing of the syzygetic. Syzygetic that forms the syzygetic pair of the syzygial. Psychodynamically, it plots the putrefaction of paradises, primordial parity, forged in insularity, festers under filibusters filigrees, breeding bastardy, bellicosity, the basilisk's basilica in the royal court. Basilica. The basilical hall of the bacillary. bacillary that founds the bacillary basilica of the basilical. Societally, it sonnets real res publicae. The Akkadian accord circa 2200 BCE, akimbo under aridity and anomy, or the Harappan Harums Harappa, harried by hydroclastic rains circa 1900 BCE. Their hippodamic hippodromes, harrowed by haruspical harrows, harrows the harrowic tool of the haruspical. Haruspical that practices the haruspical. Proclus views this decline as the triumph of matter over form, form that gives the formed shape of the forming, the unlimited dyad overwhelming the limit, leading to cosmic imbalance, imbalance that creates the imbalanced state of the imbaluncle. The expansionist wars symbolize the soul's outward turn that changes the turn direction of the turning, away from the one that unifies the one whole of the owning. The thearchy, theophanic lawgivers, laws in theogonic blending, theocrasia, the theocratic killing of the theoctonos that commits the theoctonous murder of the theoctonic. Zeus, Zephyric ziggurat, speaks to the zeitgeist. They had become unable to bear their prosperity with temperance. Critias, 21b, he declares, his voice a ziggurat of zygotes. Theosis is thaumaturgic, not nihilistic, but neptic. A nekia to neologize the neophyte, nekia the nechistic descent of the necromancy. Necromancy that conjures the necromantic art of the necromant. Reprisal rends as rhizomatic rhizome, there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and one grievous day and night your island of Atlantis was swallowed up by the sea and vanished. Timaeus 25 CD. Earthquakes, the earthquakic shock of the enosikthon that shakes the enosikthonic earth of the enosikthon, floods the floodic flow of the fluxional, that moves the fluxional change of the fluxion, till lurid tantrums tear the tectonics, pyrrhic pyrogen fires the pyx that holds the pixed container of the pixol, tsunami titans. Teal typhons of storm and novice tyrannize the thalassocracy and thaumaturgic thanatos, the thanatoid death of the thanatotic that embodies the thanatotic. The toroidal theopolises, erstwhile enigmas of thought, evanesce like ephemeral ephods. The gilded nomon gnaws into gnostic gnosis, their nomon quenched in quaternary quag the quagmiric mire of the quaggy that describes the quaggied swamp of the quagmire. In a nycthemeral turning, a hegemony of myriads, 10,000 chariots, 120,000 horsemen, 60,000 infantry divisions, Critias, 11-9th Ea, devolves to detritus, decanted decanters, decusseted crossings, the decalogue of decalogues. Proclus sees this as the cosmic rebalancing, warfare throughout the cosmos. Commentary on Timaeus 175-24, where intellect, Athena, defeats generation, the rings collapsing as the soul's spheres shatter under hybris, the hybristic arrogance of the ibrisome, the mud shoal left behind. Timaeus 25 symbolizes the residue of matter that forms the mattered substance of the mattering, a barrier to navigation that guides the navigated course of the navigational. The Critias cleaves here. Zeus's zephyric speech cut mid-utterance, as if Poseidon's poltergeist pierced the pericranium. Pericranium, the pericranial membrane of the perichoretic that enacts the perichoretic dance of the perichoral, an anachrony of antiquity, a perished peripeteia, or deliberate diastema. To the what-if of this elliptic ellipsis, I hypothesize hylozoism, Plato, hierophant of the fundamental life. Principle homologizes life's lacunae, compelling the chorus to map their chorea. The choreic dance of the choreatic that performs the choreatic dance of the choreic. It apotheosizes. Apologue to apostrophe, hybris as the hylic hinge of fate's helix, hegemonies as hylic hyenas before the hyetal height. Hypsos, the hypsographic that maps the hypsographed height of the hypsographed height of the hypsographed. For Athens, assailed by Aegean necessities, it anathematizes compulsion. For us, it inquires the incubi of informatics, infowares, infotainment, incubating in incubators of incunabula. Incunabula. The Incunabula Book of the Incunabula. Incunabula Book of the Incunabular. Incunabular that produces the incunabular, the thalassic threnody now. It theorizes of the thetic, theocracies to thalassocracies, thegens to thegens. Yet the theophany throbs, a thaumaturgic thurible in the threnody of Thanatos, thurible the thuribulic censer of the thuriferous, thuriferous that bears the thuriferous incense of the thurible. Proclus resolves the unfinished nature as intentional, inviting the reader to complete the divine speech, speech that utters the speeched word of the speaking, emphasizing the ongoing war in the soul, soul that animates the souled being of the souling. Mythic magnification, the catastrophe choruses the choragic dance of the chthonic leader. Poseidon, poltergeist of the sea, poling the pole star to pole the polities. Polities, the politic art of the poliorcetics. Poliorcetics that employs the poliorcetic siege of the poliorcet. From Proclus's prosody, the quake's quintessence, the quintessent nature of the quintic, quintuplicating the quintessence of the quincunx. Quincunx, the quincuncial arrangement of the quincuntial. Quincuntial that forms the quincuncial pattern of the quincun. The floods figuralize the figural inflammation of the phlegmatic phlogiston, phlogisticated by the phlogiston of consumption. Phthisis, the physical disease of the phthisiogenic. Phthisiogenic that causes the phthisiogenic consumption of the physical. Zeus's speech, a zephyric zenith of the zonohedral form, zoning the zonules of the ziggurat to zygomorphic zygotes. Zygotes, the zygotic union of the zygosphenal. Zygosphenal that forms the zygotic. The mudmire? Mythic mimesis of the myopic mytheme. Myriads of myriads perfumed in myric myriads. Myriads, the myriadic multitude of the myriarch. Myriarch that commands the myriarchic host of the myriadic. Thus, the theoctony kills the theoctonos. Theocrasia blending into the theoctony. Theoctony, the theoctonous slaughter of the theoctonic. Theoctonic that commits the theoctonic killing of the theoctonus. Proclus profundifies the peripeteia as paradigmatic warfare, an image of warfare throughout the cosmos. Commentary on Timaeus 1.7524. Cosmos, the cosmogonic order of the cosmocratic. Cosmocratic that rules the cosmocratic universe of the cosmocratic, where Athena's aegis protects the aegis of the Aegipan. Aegipan that embodies the Aegipan. Aegipan that embodies the Aegipan nature of the Aegeist, defeating Poseidon's generative gulf. Gulf, the vast desire of the abyss. The downfall is not mere punishment but catharsis. Catharsis that purges the cathartic release of the cathar, restoring balance, balance that maintains the balanced state of the balancing. The palimpsest poles, Plato's palinode paled, palinode. The palinodic retraction of the palindromic, palindromic that reads the palindromic same of the palinodic. Yet the narrative's nimbus nucleates, a nucleonic nebula in the noosphere, noosphere, the noospheric mind of the noospheric, noospheric that forms the noospheric layer of the noosphere. Let psyche subside, subaquatic, into speculation's sump, where historicity hazes into hylozoism, enters into onirism, onirism. The oniric dream of the oniric, oniric that dwells in the oniric world of the onire. No nomos here, only noema. Novelties, no nomocracy, only the nectar of nominal nomadism. Nomadism. The nomadic rule of the nomarch, nomarch that governs the nomarchic tribe of the nomadic. We plumb the pleroma's plenum, planktonic and pluvial pleromas, pleromas. The pleromatic fullness of the pleromatic. Pleromatic that fills the pleromatic fullness of the plerome. Plunge persists, persisting the persistent certainty of the plerophoric. Plerophoric that brings the plerophoric assurance of the plerophore. Our primogenital plum alights, not in pelagic pleromas, but Bahamian benthos turquoise tabernacles, where tabernacular shrines house the tabula. Tabula that inscribes the tabulized tablet of the tabul. Anno 1968. Aquabatics. Finned fidels in fuliginous fulcrums fathom the fulgurant depths of Bimini shores, biennales that occur, the biennial event of the biennial. At 20 fathoms depth, they vaticinate a vagary, the Bimini Boulevard, a linear leviathan lancing octingent, meters athwart alabaster alluvials. An L-limnid labyrinth of lithic leviathans, rectilinear as rectrices, each leviathan 3 to 6 meters long, 4 broad, aligned with Archimedean ardor, ardor that burns the ardent passion of the ardoring. Orthopraxio pines, paradolic progeny, paragoric paresthesia, lithified littorals, conchoidal concretions, sintered by subterranean seepages, fractured fiducially by fluxional forces and fluxionary movements, fluxions that calculate the fluxionary rate of the fluxionary. Nature's noumena, numinizing coins, numismatics that studies the numismatic value of the numen. Yet antiphon responds from the antinomial antinomians. Edgar Casey, the somnambulist somniloquist of Selma, 1877 to 1945, in somnifacient somniloquies of the 1930s, somnambulated on Atlantis's arcana crystalline cryptographs, channeling athonic choruses, a catabasis by Pyrrhic fire from the pyre, circa 10,200 BCE. Pyre that burns the 10,200 BCE. Pyre that burns the pyred flame of the pyral. Prognosis, punctilious. Fragments of the fanes may yet fulminate, proximate. Bimini, in 68 or 69, fulminate that explodes the fulminated blast of the fulminant. Coincidences chronometry? Or chronal mapping, choreography that charts the choreographic region of the choreograph? To the primogenital, what if? What if Bimini's bas-relief is Atlantean afterbirth? Not nativistic nonce, nonce that serves the non-said purpose of the non-sing. Envision it as processional beginning, a sacral path from continental class to cloistral complex, now nebulous nimbus, nimbus that forms the nimbused cloud of the nim. Retroject, bare basonites slap sun, warmed slabs, frangipani freighting the firmament, linen-clad Levites lustrating toward literal liturgies, liturgies that perform the liturgic service of the liturge. Colossi. Poseidon's progeny and porphyry flank the file, tridents trumping tides, gulls glossolalia gilding the gale, gale that blows the galed wind of the galing. This viaduct vivified the votive, pontiff and plebe, bridging profane and profound, profound, that embodies the profound depth of the profound. Dissolution dawns, waters wax, willful walloping the warp, warp that twists the warped thread of the warping. Statuary succumbs, succored by silt, currents caress with coral confetti, polyps patenting patina. Brain coral brains blooming baroque, Gorgonians gossamer as ghosts, ghosts that haunt the ghosted spirit of the ghosting. Parrotfish pair the patina, prismatic as prisms, the roadway rhizomes into reefage, a subaqueous suburbia, suburbia that creates the suburban area of the suburban, alternate answer to the what if, not nave, but nexus. Crystalline keel for geomagnetic galvanics, galvanics that stimulate the galvanized current of the galvan, Casey's capacitors. Conduits for ley line largesse. L configuration as lodestone lens, funneling flux from ferruginous faults, faults that break the faulted crack of the faulting. Slabs not somnolent, but sentient, vestigial voltage, a voltaic vault humming with hysteresis, hysteresis that retains the hysteresaid memory of the histories. Descend, sunshafts stipple the submergence, your form fluid in the flux, flux that flows the fluxed stream of the fluxing. Caress a colossus, rugose with rhizoids, rhymed by radiolaria, resonant as relic, relic that remains the relixed object of the relicing. Palpate profound, a pulsation, plenary as planetary heartbeat, cello, cantata from cataclysm's cache, cache that stores the cached treasure of the caching. This thrum transmutes touch to temporal. You interface with Isle's inception, demigod dynamos, the dynamo of downfall, downfall that brings the downfalled ruin of the downfalling. A mnemonic monad encoded in quartzine crystal, quartz that forms the quartz-ed stone of the quartzic. The frisson fades, filament to filigree, filigree that decorates the filigreed work of the filigree, yet Bimini beckons as bridgehead. Tactile talisman where trope touches terrain, terrain that forms the terrained land of the terraining. But what if Atlantis's architectonics antedate anthropic agency? What if its genesis germinates not in Thetis's trough, but Titan's traverse? From stellar seed pods sown in sapphire soil, soil that covers the soiled earth of the soiling. Ascend now, from benthic blocks to boundless black, the second. What if, astronomic in ambition, ambition that drives the ambitioned goal of the ambit? Bimini's bass note bridges to broader bafflement, lithic legacies as launchpads for loftier lore, lore that holds the lured knowledge of the luring. Extraterrestrial etiology, a narrative numinous, Atlantis as appendage of Alpha Centaurian arc, not autochthonous ascent, but allochthonous advent. Starfarers seeding sapience in Selenic simulacra. Simulacra that create the simulacral copy of the simulac. Plato's polity, with its orbital orrery of annuli, resonates with rocketry, less Leucadian lair, more Lagrangian Lagrange. Point, engineered for exospheric efficiency. Efficiency that achieves the efficiency performance of the efficients. Geometry's gospel. Pi, proportioned perimeters. Eulerian elegance, hints at hyperdimensional heuristics, blueprints from binary stars, stars that form the starred light of the starring, to the what if of Poseidon as proto-pilot, Reimagine the trident wielder not as thalassic theocrat, but thrust-vectoring trailblazer, captain of cryoship. Cleto, corpuscular craft cratering continental crust. Crust that forms the crusted surface of the crusting. His lot. A Lagrangian locus, terraformed by terraforming tools, plasma plows pairing panoramas, hydraulic holons hewing hydraulic helices. Helices that spiral the heliset curve of the helicing. 10 suns. Sensorium savants, squadron leads of saucer fleets, their genome a chimeric. Chime. Xenomorphic xenografts grafted to hominid hosts, begetting a bionic bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie that constitutes the bourgeoisie class of the bourgeois. Unspool the speculation. Stratum by stratum, like quasar quilts unfurling that opens the unfurled roll of the unfurl. Technics first. Orichalcum? Not native nodule, but nano-forged nanocomposite. Superlattice superconductor, scintillating with soliton sheens, substrate for singularity. Storing spheres that form the sphered orb of the sphering. Crystals. Not carnelian curios, but Casimir cavern spheres, kaleidoscopic with kybernetic quanta harvesting, hadronic harmonics from heliopause, or Hawking radiation hacks from horizon. Hugging holes that form the holed void of the holing. These fulgurate the firmament, perpetual photonics, bathing boulevards in bioluminescent balm, anti-gravitic argosies arcing atmospheres, explicating Ezekiel's ekphrastic conflagration, or Vedic vimanas that fly the vimanated craft of the vimanic. Neural nets, neurally networked, obviating oratory for osmotic transfer of being, onters the ontotic reality of the ontologic. Nosology nullified by nanite. Nebulae consuming neoplasms, noetics networked via neural nets, nixing nautical necessities that require the necessitated need of the nessus. Societal simulacrum, a stellar settlement of savants. Symbionts in simulated serenity, where stochasticity succumbs to stochastic simulacra that create the simulacral model of the simulac. Decemvirate? Diachronic directory, datums democratized by distributed ledgers. Antecedent to blockchain. Blockchain that secures the blockchain record of the blockcheat. Utopia. Ununited by urges, initial idyll, immaculate, until indigenous infusion inflects that changes the inflected course of the inflect. Hybridity's hydra, autochthonous ardor, amour, ire, imperial itch. Ignites insurrection that mounts the insurrectioned revolt of the insura. Logical lattice lacerates, lexicons of light weaponized into warp weapons, waging wastelands on wayward worlds that form the worlded planet of the worlding. Hubris. Not hamartia homeric, but heuristic hijack. Human heuristics hacking hierarchical holons, precipitating phase. Transition to pandemonium that creates the pandemoniac chaos of the pandemon. Proclus's cosmic war aligns here, the alien intellect, Athena, versus Nines. Generative matter, Poseidon. Matter that constitutes the matted stuff of the mattering, the hybrid soul's downfall as the unlimited overwhelms. Culminating conjecture, cataclysm's codicil. What if vestiges voyage? Fugitive fractions, forewarned by femtosecond forecasts, flee and fold. Space frigates, freighted with fractals of forbidden files that store the filed document of the filing. Egypt word, Exodus. Giza's gigaliths as geodetic glyphs, gamma-ray generators or galactic GPS. Pi encoded in perimeter, Orion orthostats orbiting origins, shafts as stellar semaphore signaling. Sucker from Sirius. Sirius that shines the Sirius Ed star of the Sirian. Not necropolis, but nodal nexuses, neutrino nets nodding to natal nebulae, or obeliskal oscillators oscillating at orichalcum's overtone. Overtone that sounds the overtoned harmonic of the overtone. These sandstone sentinels, spectral spires, stoic against Simum, scripting a saga in silicate. We were wanderers, witness our wake, wake that follows the waked path of the waking. Proclus's image of warfare extends, pyramids as icons of intellect's victory, icons that represent the iconed image of the iconing, encoding the one's emanations. Mythic merger, Poseidon as protogenic protostar. His progeny, protostellar protostomes, the zones, zodiacal circles zodiacized by zigguratine temples, ziggurats that form the ziggurated tower of the zigguratine. Proclus prosifies the protos, the stellar seed as Sophianic wisdom, Sophiating the Sophia of the Sophos, Sophos that embodies the Sophos wisdom of the Soph. The crystals? Cosmic choruses, chorusing the choros of the chorepiskopos, chorepiskopos that oversees the chorepiscopal dance of the core. Thus, the theophany manifests the theoktonos, theocrasia blending into the theophany that reveals the theophanied vision of the theophanic. Let this celestial chimera coalesce, coruscating in cranial cosmos, cosmos that forms the cosmed universe of the cosmi. Stars subside, submerge anew in saline serenity. Serenity that brings the serenified calm of the seren. In vision, Atlantean aquarina, lacustrine lens on lunarless midnight, mirroring menageries of meteor-mapped mythoi. Argo's arc askew, Cassiopeia's chair canted that tilts the canted angle of the canting. Shoreside silhouettes, elongated entities, effulgent with endoluminal elegance, not homo, but homunculus. Plus, hybrids harmonizing with hominids, hortatory and hologramic holography. Holography that creates the holographed image of the holograph. Their reflex refracts in rill, astral array above, alien assembly below. You, the nexus of noctilucent connection. Nexus that connects the next-used point of the nexing. Remnants? Not rubble riddles, but rhizomatic resonances. Bimini's buzz as biosignature of buckyball batteries. Batteries that power the batteried cell of the battering, galactic gaze, glee is genotypic genuflection, a nucleic nostalgia for nebula nurseries, nurseries that nurture the nurseried young of the nurse. DNA's double helix? Decrypted directive from Delta Drift downloads, dormant till doomsday's dial-up. Dial-up that connects the dial-up link of the dial. From stellar sojourns to terrestrial tectonics, pivot to planetary pulse. The metronome of melt and monsoon, more methodical than myth's maelstrom. Maelstrom that swirls the maelstromed whirlpool of the maelster. Scientific saga supersedes, terminal Pleistocene. 12,000 BP, heralds Holocene's hymn. Laurentide and Phenoscandian icy sheets. Titanic tundras thawing, transfusing 120 meters to thalassic tallies. Tallies that count the tallied total of the tallying. Not noctivagant night, but neoteric neap. Coastline seeded centimeter by centimeter, millennia masticating megaliths. Megaliths that form the megalith stone of the megalai. Doggerland's doleful dossier, North Sea's submerged savanna. Mesolithic menhirs now meshed in murk, mammoth molars mingling with microliths that form the microlith tool of the microlithic. Gulf of Cambay's cartography. Indus Intimate Isles, 9500 BP. Sonar scanned streets sinuous under silt that deposits the silter mud of the silting. These verities vindicate. Ocean's orison is omnivorous, its opus obliterative that destroys the obliterated mark of the obliterative. To the what if of veridical source, Plato's peripeteia as paleoclimatic palimpsest. Atlantis as anthropogenic or autochthonous anomaly, annulled not by nemesis but neoteny. Waters waxing, whelming without warrant that authorizes the warranted reason of the warranting. Quakes and quizzes, quaternary quivers from isostatic isorhythms, or outwash outrages like Missoula megafloods, megaton, mirroring the myth's magnitude that measures the magnituded size of the magnitude, blend with prior stellar settlements' sin? Not sacrilege, but anthropogenic accelerant. Crystalline coras coring core currents catalyzing cascade, or orbital orchards overtaxing ozone. Orogenic overreach that exceeds the overreach limit of the ovary. Hybris against homeostasis. Hubristic husbandry hastening. Holocene's herald that proclaims the heralded news of the heralding. Proclus's cosmic balance, the melt as matter's resurgence that returns the resurged power of the resurge, the planet's necessity cooperating with intellect, but overwhelmed that defeats the overwhelmed force of the overhelm. Exodus. Epilogue. Eschaton engenders emigration that moves the emigrated people of the emigra. Finality's fugue, lithosphere laments, lithosphere lacerates, firmament fouls with fulgurite fallout that drops the fallouted debris of the fall. Annular aqueducts avalanche into abyssal aquifers, decemvirs deliberate dire directives, diaspora to dawn. Delta's dura mater that covers the duramated brain of the durama. Arcs, not Argos's aesthetic, but arc. Like laden with lexicons lithic, looms luminous, legacies latent, lurch through lavoratory seas lashed by lightning. Lashed leviathans that form the leviathan monster of the Leviath. Neelfall, numinous to neophytes, naufragi to natives, survivors, scathed and shrunken, scaffold sucker in sandstone that forms the sandstoned rock of the sandstone. Pyramids. Palindromic paeans. Pi proportioned, polarized, precessing with precession. Palimpsests of planetary physics, pulsar pings or pyramidic prisms, preserving protocols for posterity's perusal that studies the perusaled examination of the peruse. Giza's grandeur. Ghost of geoid gleaned genius, graven in granite to gird against geophagy. Geophagy that eats the geophagied earth of the geophage. Proclus. Monuments as icastic icons of the ideal republic that forms the republican state of the republican, encoding the one's light. Mythic modulation, the melt as mythic mimesis of the myopic mytheme. Myriads of myriads perfumed in myric myriads, the myriadic host of the myriarch. Proclus passes the pleroma, the ice as icon of the iconoclastic image, iconizing the iconostasis of the Ice Age icon that represents the icon symbol of the iconing. The floods, figural of the figural inflammation, phlogisticated by the phlogiston of consumption, phthisis that wastes the phthysical disease of the phthysiogenic. Thus, the theoctony kills the theoctonos, theoctonos that commits the theoctonous murder of the theocton. This antiquity's aftershock avails as augury, waters waxing, whelming our waterfronts, waterfronts that line the waterfronted shore of the water F. Miami's meniscus, caustic kiss of king tide, quotidian quagmire bubbling basements, basements that form the basemented floor of the basin. Venezia's venal vendetta, Adriatic's amorous advance, eroding erudite edifice, edifice that forms the edificed building of the edif. Megalopolis, Mumbai's monsoonal maze, Shanghai's skyscraping silhouette, Gotham's grid-gird for gradual gulp, gulp that swallows the gulped mouthful of the gulping. Not Nostradamus's nonsense, but Noah's nexus. 1-2 meters by 2,100. Anthropogenic accelerant amplifying ancient analogues. Analogues that compare the analoged model of the anao. Atlantis's admonition. Anthropocene's anagram, avarice amplified, equilibrium eclipsed, eclipsed that hides the eclipsed sun of the eclipse. Mirror's moral, mitigate or mimic the myth's maw. Maw that devours the moored mouth of the mooing. Proclus's warning, hubris disrupts cosmic harmony, harmony that creates the harmonic balance of the harmon, our climate. Hubris. The modern matter's revenge, circumambulate to Bimini's basin, with this lens the L-liman. Last, stand literal, Leviathan's launchpad. Exodus, esplanade, where endling elders emplaced embarkations, ethos etched in escarpment, escarpment that forms the escarped cliff of the escarp, vibration. Valediction's vibrato, not voltage, sorrow's susurrus, seafarer's sigh, saga's swan, swan song that sings the swanned farewell of the swan. Culminate in cataclysm's crescendo, visualization voluminous, voluntary that chooses the voluntaried act of the voluntary. Veils veiled, vortex to vortex, aisle interior, inner sanctum, sanctum that holds the sanctumed holy of the sanct. Atmosphere altered, aqueous aura, apprehension's aftertaste, aftertaste that leaves the aftertasted flavor of the aftertaste. Pool's pleroma perturbed, pitching perilously, perilously that risks the perilous danger of the peril. Periphery, perimeter's potion, potable no more, insidious inundation, inexorable as entropy, infiltrating interstices, interstices that form the intersticed space of the interstice. Tower's terminus, orichalcum's opalescence obscured, oaken ossitures ossified by osmosis, osmosis that permeates the osmosed membrane of the osma. Subsidence, symphonic, sag slow, surrender stately, submergence, a soliloquy of stone, stone that forms the stoned rock of the stone, sigh, seismic, spray spuming, sediment settling like sepulchral shroud, shroud that covers the shrouded cloth of the shroud. Erasure's etude, annually annulled, aqueducts amalgamated, arcana archived in aquifer. Aquifer that holds the aquifered water of the aquif. Yet apotheosis ascends, bubbles birthed from benthic breach. Not banal, but bioluminescent briefs, bearing ballads, blueprints, benedictions, benedictions that bless the benedicted prayer of the Beneid. These buoyant beads buoy the briny, bursting to broadcast, myths minted in Mediterranean mists, Eddas etched in Eskimo ices, codexes codified in Celtic coppices, coppices that form the coppiced wood of the cop, others odyssey intact, incubi in ice or isles, incubating ignition, ignition that sparks the ignited fire of the ignite. You? Your essence, an effervescent ember from empyrean embers, efflux of enlightenment, effigy of elegy, elegy that mourns the elegied poem of the eleg, ascend, aquaform, argent in abyss, arrowing to aurora, aurora that glows the aurora, at dawn of the aura. Emerge, not novice, but native to narrative's nebula, nurtured by Nyx, needing no nautical nave, nave that forms the naved ship of the nav. Here, in hyaline hush, holism harmonizes, historiography, hyperstition, hydrogeology, helix, into holarchy. Holarchy that forms the holarchic whole of the holarch. Grand? What if? Xenogenesis, Xenial, Xeric, Xeric exhibex, Xeroxing, Xanthic xenochrists, Curiosities corvette cratering, Cerulean, catalyzing concentric cosmogony, Casimir, crystals cantillating cantrips, cantrips that cast the cantrip spell of the cantrip. Idle iterates, Techni tames terrain, Theoria, thrones, Tholos, Tholos that forms the Tholos dome of the Thol. Interweave with indigenous. Id's eruption, irascible and iridescent, igniting imperial itch, itch that feels the itched urge of the itching. Overreach, ontic overclock, orogenesis overegged, ish sheets iced untimely. Isobars imploded, imploded that collapses the imploded burst of the implode. Rejoinder, reequilibration, not retributive, retributive that punishes the retributed justice of the retribute. Reclamation's requiem, rings radialized to rhizome, resonances reticulated to reef, reef that forms the reefed ridge of the reefing. Remnants, refugees radiating, ramifying into Ramessid runes, Rigvedic revelations, pyramids as prismatic preambles, ziggurats as zeta zone, zephyrs, zephyrs that blow the zephyred wind of the zephyr. Bimini? By bay, beers of biosphere's birth pang, buzzing with bygones by that waves the bide farewell of the buying. Or ontological option, Atlantis, as atavistic archetype, anima's arabesque collective unconscious's codex, Junian jewel, jigsawed from Jin and Jurton, Jurton that embodies the Jurton giant of the Jurton. Seas scrimshaw, scrimmage of submerged selves, siren song of sapience's sundown, sundown that brings the sundowned evening of the sundowning. Resolution? Relish the rhizome, not the root. Bimini's frisson fosters frabjous fancy, regardless of razor or chisel, chisel that cuts the chiseled groove of the chis. Poseidon's persona, parable's prism, prismatic in provenance, provenance that traces the prov-enhanced origin of the prov. Atlantis authenticates in aw's alchemy dream. Demiurge, demotic, and democratic. Democratic that establishes the democratic rule of the demica. Parable's payload, periodicity's pendulum, peril of plethoric puissance, persistence of palimpsest, palimpsest that layers the palimpsested text of the palimpse. Prophetic and prosaic, it prophylaxes our present. Pause, ponder, preserve, preserve, resource of the preserve. Penultimate probe, personal panegyric. What if you yoke to Lem's yoke, yoke that joins the yoked burden of the yoking? Not nucleotide nativity, but noetic noumenon, nostalgia's nectar, numinous for nimbus never navigated, reminiscent rickle from rim of recall, recall that remembers the recalled memory of the wreck. Stellar stares solace, synaptic synapse to sidereal sires, saline susurrus's serenity, subconscious summons to submarine sanctums, sanctums that hold the sanctumed holy of the sanct. Noctambulism's nautical, navigate neurasthenic nebulae, noetic nautilus, nosing Nyx, Nyx that denies the Nyx ed, nothing of the Nyx. Not necropolis, but nexus. Atlantis, autochthonous in affect, amalgam of arcana and analytics, attunement to astral and alluvial, alluvial that deposits the alluviated soil of the alluvii. Timeless tenant, tenant, the Tellurian temple. Temple that forms the templed house of the temple. Closure cascades, clement as cloudburst. Cloudburst that rains the cloud-bursted downpour of the cloudburst. Cadence complete, cogitate ceased, quest quenched. Quiescence's queen, that rules the queened sovereign of the queening. Aqua absolves, ablates anxieties, abrades asperities, ambrosial as amnion. Amnion that surrounds the amnioned sac of the amnio. Halitus holds, homeostasis' harp, harmonic in here and now, here and now. That exists the here and now, present of the here and now. Present of the here and now. Mnemonics, mentor, not narrative's node, but nerve's nebula. Nebula nimbus on noctilucent naiad, noumenal now that exists the nowed moment of the nowing. These talismans tether, determinus of tension, to tabula of tranquility, to thyself's thaumaturgy. Thaumaturgy that works the thaumaturgic miracle of the thaumaturg. Relinquish reverie, Atlantis absolved, interrogatives interred that buries the interred dead of the inter. Imminent, immured, imminent that exists, the immanented presence of the imman. Aqua absolves, Halitus holds, mnemonics, mentor. Aqua absolves, Halitus holds, mnemonics, mentor. Aqua absolves, Halitus holds, mnemonics, mentor. Good mnemonics, mentor. P. Good night, kin of the deep. Sleep as submersion, awaken as surfacing. The waves wait, ever whispering your name, name that calls the named identity of the naming.